Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Cow. I'm actually from Anne Arundel County. And I'm part of an education arm of a group called Maryland Wise Women, started about 2.5 years ago. So my question, we did some lobbying last year with Strong Schools Maryland. We talked to some Republican delegates, and I have lots of friends and neighbors in District 33 that we talked to things about, and Republican that have two things that they say to me, and I guess I want to know how to respond. One is, I hear that things need to begin at home, and until we fix problems at home, the schools can't do anything. So that's one argument I've heard. And the second argument is school choice, that instead of working harder on our public schools, we should increase the choices people have to leave the schools that are struggling and go to other places. And so I want to be able to answer to them why those two things won't work or are wrong in a sense, or what would you respond to in the context of what you both know?
Sure.
Sure. I mean, to take the second question first, there has been decades of research on the relative merits of public schools, of public charter schools, and of non-public schools. And the research is pretty clear that there is no benefit necessarily to switching to a system of public charters or non-publics. And in fact, to people who make that argument, I point out that we already have a lot of options in the state of Maryland, particularly in districts where the public schools have historically had more challenges. The jurisdiction with the highest number of charter schools in Maryland is Baltimore City. And I think the jurisdiction with the second highest is Prince George's County. And we have a relatively robust network of non-public schools in Maryland, which has been true for many, many years, in part because we're a historically Catholic state, so that we had the parochial school system for many years. But choice alone does not produce the type of improvement in education that we need. I would also add to it that the challenge is that we have a responsibility of making sure every single child has an opportunity to succeed, not just the child whose parents know enough about the system to be able to get their kids into a private school or a charter school. So, school choice, I think, there are some merits to the type of innovation that can happen, for example, in public charter schools, but it's not the fix here.
Could I just add to that? So let's suppose we had school choice. That doesn't change the circumstances teachers are in. We still have undercompensated teachers working in conditions that they don't find attractive enough to want to stay in the profession. That doesn't bring more children to kindergarten ready to learn. It doesn't provide a high quality track for career and technical education. Not all of our kids need to go to college. There are so many good jobs out there if they have the right skill. School choice doesn't do any of that. And so, there's actually even an editorial in the Post today saying about school choice. To make the argument against what we want to do is to say school choice. School choice doesn't change the circumstances in the schools. So, excuse me.
No.
Now, her first question.
Oh yeah, about families.
Yeah.
So maybe 30 years ago now, there was a study done in the Midwest where researchers went into the homes of families and just observed. And were observing to record the variety of vocabulary that was used around young children. And they found that just by dint of the socioeconomic status of the family, a child of upper-class professional parents, by the time they enter kindergarten, has been exposed to tens of thousands more words than a child of a low-income family. Now, I'll tell you this as somebody who taught in a school where families faced a lot of challenges. I have yet to meet a single parent that did not want their children to be successful. Not one. But the reality is that some families have more resources than others. I frankly find the argument that we need to, that families need to step up, that we need families to be fixed first, to be a little bit offensive. I think it assumes that people who live in poverty are somehow making bad choices, and that's why they live in poverty. And that, in all of my life experience and everything I've read in research, and I'm a clinical professor in School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, I spent a lot of time with research. That's simply not true. Do we want to provide more support to families? Absolutely. But our schools are places that help to compensate for flaws in our economy and our society more generally. And we need to make sure that the schools have the resources they need.
And I just add to that. I mean, think about a upper middle class or middle class family that has the disposable income to hire tutors, to send kids to SAT prep courses. They don't exist for low-income families. You got low-income families where the parents are working 2 jobs just trying to make ends meet. There are just not enough hours in the day to devote the time and attention that these children need. And the whole concept of the community school is to get, in part, families more engaged in the school. It becomes a magnet for families to be welcomed into the school, to understand the services that are available to the children, to learn how to help with help the young people when they are at home. So it's just such an uneven playing field when it comes to the resources available to wealthier parents than to low-income parents.
I'd also add, historically, one of the things that made child rearing in the U.S. robust was that historically we had communities where the raising of children was seen as more of a communal responsibility, right? That I didn't just have responsibility for my own children, but the neighbor's kids, right? That it took a village, that it takes the entire community to raise a kid. So I also, would argue that the idea of placing entire responsibility for a kid's success in school on just one family, like that has never historically been the case in the U.S. So to those conservatives that like to harken back to a better day, that better day accepted a communal responsibility for the education of children.
Hi, I'm Laura Dunnigan. I'm from Howard County. I was a special education teacher, and the keyword there was. I taught in Howard County Public Schools for 7 years. I did early childhood, early intervention, preschool, elementary, special ed. And then I taught at our community college for the past 14 years. And now I'm at the Maryland General Assembly. I work with Delegate Shelley Hellman. So a little bit of the gamut there. But my concern is when you're talking about the funding equity issues, first, I think if we would pay more attention to the report back in the day, the Kerner report versus the Moynihan report, which sort of framed poverty as like who you're going to blame for living in poverty, and all of our historical reasons going back to redlining and housing and how all those are interchanged. I feel like it's like a deeper answer to some of the people who are talking against some of the equity issues, like who are sort of blind spot to history and how our country was segregated. But my question is, with the community schools, where I wholeheartedly agree, like we need the wraparound services, we need family support, we need all that extra money and funding, do you worry about it becoming an island? And I'm wondering specifically about research from Rucker Johnson and Sean Reardon, who talk about integrating students with the high poverty students and the upper income, because in Howard County, I'm sure you've probably read what's going on here, I feel like parents are feeling entitled to say, well, I've got the money to buy in this certain area for this school. So I feel like we're co-opting in some ways, and across the country, we're co-opting our public schools into almost like a charter school. Like we're co-opting them by saying, I can afford to live in this neighborhood, so I have a right to go to this school. And it's okay to have a community school and we can throw more money at it, they are sort of okay with that. But I worry about the fact that our demographic across our country is changing, and we're a majority minority population, and the results of being 40% not being able to read above the 10th grade level or pass an algebra exam, and we're becoming not just in Howard County, but across the state, a have and a have-nots. And for the community schools to say, okay, we're gonna give you more resources, but at the same time, we're sort of still over-resourcing privately funding. You know, we have boosters that are, you know, not funding equitably school to school. They're getting all these extra services based on where you live. Is there, in your research, support for the way that we're districting schools? And I know that that has its challenges too, but to have more integration across socioeconomic levels, because the research from Education Trust and others clearly says that when you have more integration, those kids that are performing at lower levels are going to do better. And the kids that were already performing high because of their parents' income don't do any worse, and in a lot of ways do better.
So, I 100% agree that we'd be much better off if we had a wider distribution in our schools based on income. That would be, I would love to see that day come. And I think long-term, the commission's recommendations will lead us there, because people will earn more in larger incomes. They'll move out of their concentrated poverty. That region, those areas will get redeveloped and be mixed income communities. But how long do you think that's going to take?
Right, well, that's what I'm saying.
It's going to take a long,
and there's
long
still a lot
time.
of dynamics to go along with that.
Do we just sort of wait for that to occur?
Or can we do an and? Like, can we do, yes, community schools, but is there anything that we can do, like, say, once a school reaches a certain threshold of farms, that you say, time to redistrict, at the state level, you say, hey, school system, time to
Well,
redistrict.
that would be something that sort of is above the commission. I mean, I don't know if Eric has any thoughts about that, but
There's nothing that's gonna be about it in the.
I know there wouldn't be, but I'm
Um,
just wondering, like, would there be an advantage from the state level to say that we need to play a role in not letting it become a system of
I think it's worth more conversation. I think, you know, a couple observations here. First of all, the type of segregation we see in our schools right now is at root an issue of broader patterns of segregation in our communities.
Right.
And that goes back a very long time. In fact, the first jurisdiction in the United States that started implementing the types of practices like redlining was the city of Baltimore.
Yes, I know.
So there's a lot of history to that in the
Yeah.
city of Maryland. A lot of the decisions that impact that, frankly, are not made at the state level. They're made by county councils and school boards. So I'll just say my personal opinion. I give Superintendent Martorano a tremendous amount of credit for taking on a politically difficult fight that absolutely needs to happen. I wish more superintendents in the state were willing to do it. I wish there were conversations in particular between Baltimore City and Baltimore County about cross-jurisdictional schools.
Yeah.
I think that there is increasing attention to that issue and increasing activism on it. And yes, I think we should have more conversations in Annapolis, but we really need to see a lot of conversations happening in the county seats and in the school boards, and in particular in patterns of housing segregation. It's inexcusable that we have essentially ghettoized poverty in a lot of the state, and we absolutely have.
But you know, it's politically, even at the local level, it's sometimes political suicide to say, this is what I believe, but I feel like it's a moral, it's a moral imperative. To say that we're gonna let these kids survive, you know, exist in poverty or continue to perform at this level, and while these students are being over-resourced, I feel like, is there a way at the legislative level, and I'm only speaking as an individual, not any of my other hats, like to put a line item at the state level for equity issues? I mean, we have a line item, we have special education, I know that's federally, but there's never been a line item specifically to say, this is to fund the achievement gap, this is to fund equity.
You're talking about the line item within the council's
Yeah,
budgets?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a conversation that's gonna come up through legislation.
Incidentally, the committee that is recommending the distribution of funds between the state and the locals has now made their recommendations on a new formula, made their recommendations to the commission, which will, as I say, work on over the next 2 months. But they have addressed the committee's recommendation addresses to some extent the very point you're making. Right now, in the state of Maryland, every kid gets there's a funding formula that there's a foundation amount of money that goes to every per pupil student in Maryland. Then in addition, there are 3 categories of students. There's low-income students, that's compensatory. There's English as a second language, and there is a special ed. And based on the number, there's an extra weight. So if you're a low-income kid, not only do you get the foundation amount, but you get extra money from the state. The current funding formula says local jurisdictions only have to match the foundation amount. They don't have to match the compensatory amount. They don't have to match the special ed. They don't have to match English as a second language. This committee has made a recommendation, no. It is immoral, particularly with, let's say, compensatory education. Knowing that kids need the additional share from the local jurisdiction and not letting them have it. So and that's why we as a state are now seen as regressive in our funding, because we haven't required that match. That match is going to be required now. Now, the committee also recommended that there are certain jurisdictions that have absolutely maxed out their taxing capacity. And it would be unreasonable for them to, so there is kind of a circuit breaker where the state would have to step in with some extra support in those circumstances. But we need as a state to ensure that every low-income kid, as well as special ed and English, gets the resources that the state says they need to have.
There sort of seems to be some confusion. Is school construction money competing against Kirwan implementation money? Because you hear from some that it's a zero-sum game, or the state legislature is only willing to put so much money into education, and if we put it into construction, then there's going to be less for the Kirwan implementation.
We are, they are not competing. We are the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We can afford to both build quality schools for our students and fund them adequately. We can do both. And that's our goal, at least in the House.
One thing is that the school funding, through the commission's recommendations and the current formula, comes from the operating budget. That's tax revenue generated by the state and locals. Construction is done through bonding authority. It's a totally different, it doesn't require operating dollars, and so those two do not, in that sense, compete.
Yeah, and look, the construction issue is also an issue with a lot of the statistics that Brit mentioned, right? I mean, the classroom I worked in Montgomery County, a very well-resourced school system. The school I worked in, when it first opened, the day it opened, I went upstairs to a classroom with a science teacher that was on the 6th grade team with me. And it was a windy day, and the curtains were blowing back and forth inside the classroom because the windows were so poorly insulated, right? I know a teacher in Baltimore City schools who spent the first 2 years he was in the schools with a pair of scissors in his pocket at all times because there was no doorknob on his classroom door. And he needed the scissors to jimmy the door. I toured with Superintendent Santelisa's school in Brooklyn, in the southern part of Baltimore City, and walked into a classroom that I hesitate to call a classroom because it was about the size of 2 of these tables put together. And in that room was an ESOL teacher and 5 kids trying to learn English. These are contributing factors to teachers leaving the profession. These are contributing, like kids know. They know when the community is not investing in them. So they're contributing factors to kids dropping out of school, right? So I think we can and need to do both, and they're not competing.
I'm Ken Stevens, I live in Howard County. A lot of casinos were sold as a fundraiser for public education, yet public education gets less than half of the revenue from casinos. Is there any hope of changing? Well, a lot of it goes to the horse racing industry.
So the vast majority of the state revenue from the casinos goes into the education trust fund. The horse racing industry gets, I mean, if you total it up, maybe in the range of 10 or 15% of the total state revenue. Now, the numbers that, and this is a little confusing, but the numbers that you're talking about, that often get cited in the media, include the money that the casinos themselves get as their profit, right? So the tax rate in the state of Maryland ranges, depending on the casino, between a 40% tax rate and a 61% tax rate, depending on which casino you're talking about. And somewhat over 80% of that goes, of the tax money goes to education. And that was reinforced by the voters when they created a lockbox around the education trust fund. So, now, there is debate to be had about whether the tax rate's high. And I personally would love to see it higher, but that's another discussion.
County,
How you doing?
Shelley Heddleman's district, whatever that's worth.
The Fighting 11th, right?
Yeah. And getting the schools to have an equitable population, making the neighborhoods equitable seems like a challenge. I mean, it'd be slow to, I mean, if everyone agreed that we wanted to change that, it would be slow to make those changes. But why not bring back busing? That worked once upon a time.
So again, like these are conversations that are worth having. I think there are systems that have found ways to encourage socioeconomic integration, and you know the way that courts have interpreted the law has changed a little bit since busing had its heyday. So, for example, race alone can't be a factor for schools to.
But it wouldn't be in this case. You
Sure.
want to do economic integration.
Sure. So there are school systems that have tried to find ways to do that. For example, the middle school I taught at was part of a consortium that was created intentionally to desegregate a pocket of poverty in the county. And the way it worked was that 2/3 of the students in every one of the 3 schools that were part of the consortium were from in the consortium, which was a high poverty area, and 1/3 of them came from, on a lottery basis, from anywhere else in the county. And that had the effect of bringing in students who were from wealthier backgrounds and breaking up the concentration of poverty in the school. And the way that those students were attracted was by creating high-quality signature programs, not magnet programs. Magnet programs are different. Those are school within a school, and they could lead to issues where you're providing more resources to the kids who come in from outside than the kids who are in the neighborhood. But a signature program, every kid in the school gets the same thing. So techniques like that can be effective. You know, I think there are larger, particularly political challenges with the busing debate, as there have been for many years. I would say, though, you're right, that if we're trying to address segregation, and we address it through things like housing, it will take a while to dig out of, but we should maybe get a start sometime, because we're not doing it yet.
Okay, another issue is, and you were talking about raising funding, and you mentioned sales tax. Well, sales tax is a regressive tax, and I help people with their taxes. I'm part of the ARP tax aid program, and I meet an awful lot of people who have so little income. I'm surprised they're able to survive. You go and raise the sales tax either by spreading it to areas that currently aren't taxed or raising the percentage. I think you're going to see a lot of old people that are going to get sick that they wouldn't otherwise, because they wouldn't be able to afford medications that they can't afford now anyway, but it would be worse, and they wouldn't be able to afford food.
Sure, I mean, that's fair, and that's absolutely part of the conversation. You're right, it is a regressive tax, but that's why I think that anything we should do along those lines should be targeted. I'm not particularly worried about taxing tanning salons really hitting the elderly population heavily, or taxing lobbyists. So I think it's about what we're talking about taxing.
Yeah, don't raise the percentage.
No.
Lower it.
That's not
Make it progressive.
in the cards, so.
Go ahead.
Just a comment. The Maryland Center on Economic Policy has a really good paper talking about how we're going to raise the money. And some of the times when you have a regressive tax, it's always offset by another action. So if you look at that report, you'll see how that works. And I'm assuming that we
Right.
would be doing just that.
I'm glad you mentioned their paper. It's the Maryland Center for Education.
Economic Policy.
MCEP. And they do a whole analysis about how you could adjust certain taxes to pay for the cost of the implementation. It's a very thoughtful piece of work, and it isn't nearly as difficult as certain elected officials are making it sound that it will be. It's if you distribute the increases across a variety of areas of taxation, it is much more manageable.
I'm Roy Appletread from Howard County, also serve on the State Board of the League of Women Voters. Continuing on the revenue side, what revenue items or subparts of sales tax or whatever, what revenue item is the most heavy challenge or heavy lift politically, but would have the greatest impact?
I mean, part of the challenge in answering that is that we have no certainty yet about exactly which revenue sources will be the revenue sources we're looking at. I think, you know, the ones where we're likely to see the largest individual chunks of revenue include legalizing recreational cannabis, potentially increasing the tobacco tax, and some of these corporate tax loopholes. Those would be, I think, the big three that come to mind.
I'd like to move somewhat into the political realm and more specifically the ideas of messaging, because this does have a very significant impact on how the population understands all the wonderful research that's in there. And it's clearly a cost-benefit analysis, but so much of what we hear is the cost, the cost, the cost, and the cost. Wondering what efforts are being made, or if there's possibly an increased effort on the benefits to it, because we've got not only the idea of what are real estate values for a higher education, lower poverty area, the benefits of economic education, bringing it out from the state, but then also, for example, benefits of not have to send your child and pay for daycare because they're now in school, and the benefits that derives to the population, and they can spend it. There's so many of these that I think a good simple message to the Maryland population saying the benefits are actually going to be $5, $6, $7, $8 billion. It's only going to cost us $3, and changing the perception of whether this is really expensive or whether this is a great investment. It's actually going to be significantly beneficial to the state.
So two things on that. First of all, within 3 or 4 weeks, there's going to be a publication from SAGE. There's an organization. Anybody ever hear the name Aniban Basu?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So he has an economic analysis consulting service, and some private sector folks who are very interested in seeing these recommendations implemented raise money to get him to do exactly the kind of analysis you're talking about. And he's 2/3 of the way done with that, and what I've seen is it's overwhelmingly positive. The revenue that would be generated from students achieving at a much higher level over time totally pays for the cost. The time period, I don't know yet because the work's not quite done, but it's a very encouraging piece of analysis. The other thing is everybody should take a look at this lady's shirt before you leave today, because there's an organization
Yeah,
called
Strong
Strong
Schools.
Schools Maryland.
I figure most people here are
Know
involved
that,
in one way or
and
another.
so they've done a phenomenal job of getting grassroots organization around the state. They have teams of 10 people in many jurisdictions around the state, and I think they're engaged in an effort to raise money to do an aggressive public communication plan. MSEA, the Maryland State Education Association, is also having town forums around the state. I don't know, quite a few of them. There was one in Howard County, I was there. They asked me to come and say what was on the, I'm not a member of SEA, but they wanted to hear from me about what has happened in the, with the commission.
They've also had ads up.
Yeah, it was a huge room full of people in one of the schools there, so I was quite encouraged that, you know, Eric mentioned the polls. There've been 2 polls now that show that people overwhelmingly are willing to have taxes raised if it goes to high quality education. The other thing is they don't have enough information about the commission's recommendations. If we can close that gap, we can get this done. Because people are not afraid of more taxes as long as they know it's going to a solid plan to improve the quality of education. So I'm glad you raised that point. It's very important.
Well, I'm Jimmy Tall from Georges County. You know, Eric would probably know, when there's a will, there's a way, and I think the problem is the Maryland Center of Economic Policy and a whole bunch of organizations have come up with a list of tax revenue that's about $2 billion. The question is, you know, and these are working people, there are a lot of tax loopholes. For example, a 1% increase on the capital gains tax, which none of us really thought would actually raise $80 million. There's a thing where under the 529 programs, and now goes to Catholic, and you can use that for now Catholic and private schools. If that was restricted, that'd be another $30 million. There's just a tremendous number of corporate tax loopholes that other states have incorporated. The problem is when you get down to Annapolis, all the corporate lobbyists line up, and people don't kind of outrage and say we need the money, because this is in some ways a real time when we can actually raise revenue in a progressive way because of the need of the Kirwan Commission, but it's really going to need people to say, we need to raise the revenue. We also don't need to raise the revenue by regressive taxes. But I don't think taxing lobbyists is a regressive tax. But I just ask Eric because he's one of the ways that means
You're also a pro bono lobbyist, so it won't hit you, Jimmy.
but there are ways to raise revenue, so it's not like it can't be done. And I just hope the legislature takes one of these progressive taxes and incorporates them, because the problem is all the powers that be in Annapolis line up against this stuff. So it needs like rank and file people like us to actually go in and say, hey, ways to do it. And Mr. Kirwan is right. The Maryland Center of Economic Policy has a great list of ways you can raise revenue without hurting working people.
Here.
I'm Vicki Vestridge, and I live in Baltimore County, and I'm co-leader of Indivisible Towson and the subgroup of Strong Schools under Indivisible Towson. So I'm probably and District 11 is where I reside. So I'll talk to you
We're
guys.
having on District 11
I'll talk to you guys. Well, if you're in District 11, you know who our senator is. So I know we're trying to promote the forums. The next one is in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Baltimore County. But I was out of town when they had the one on the east side. But some of my members went and said that those forums in Baltimore County were presented by MSEA, but they were heavily focused on the teacher portion and not the other.
Right.
And my question is about, you mentioned we need to be advocates. I'm interested in reaching the people who haven't had kids in the schools for 10 or 20 years. They have no idea what's happened to the demographics. I volunteer with Student Support Network in Parkville High School. And the amount of poverty, and we provide food and lunches and other supports for the homeless kids. So, I just found out there were 2 seniors, or juniors or seniors, who are being put up in apartments because they have no place to live. So how do we get the message out to people who aren't connected to schools, that don't have children in the schools or aren't members of our part of PTA? Because they're the vast majority of our actual citizens who vote.
I mean, I would argue, I mean, first of all, there's some broader education that can be done about, you know, the challenges that schools are facing. I mean, schools are very different today than they were even 20 years ago. But, you know, even more than that, I think, regardless of whether you're able to have that discussion with people, I think most people intuitively understand that some of the most important recommendations in the report are necessities, right? I think people intuitively understand that teachers are underpaid, and that it's a hard job, and that too many people leave the profession. I think people intuitively understand that our schools don't provide enough career and tech ed options, right? And those are, when I'm talking to people, constituents of mine, who are maybe less educated about the whole process and about the blueprint, or even just about schools generally, those are the things I hit on, right? Like, let's pay teachers enough and treat them like professionals. Let's provide career and tech ed options. Things like that, I think, really appeal to people. Without, and because it's intuitive, don't require as much education.
All right, keep that in mind. Thank you.
That's a question. First of all, I'd like to thank you all, because when I saw this, I said I must come here and hear all of it. The first thing I was worried about, as you could tell from my accent, first of all, my name is Kay Brown. I am not from this area, but my son is. And as a grandmother, I'm very interested. And as a person living in this country, I've always felt that there's something wrong with the way that the quality of school is connected to how much taxes you pay in an area. Because I agree with you all that every child should have a good quality education given to them at least until high school. After high school, they know to use their brain, they know how to function, they could go from there. But I was worried about how you would get rid of this, but you seem to, when you address the idea that they would get extra funding for low income, extra funding for that, the second language, and so on. That will, you feel that that would cover it, plus the extras from the taxes you were talking about?
Well, first of all, right now in many jurisdictions, low-income kids are only getting half or 60% of what the state says they are entitled to, because the local isn't matching the funds. That's going to change if these recommendations are. There's one other thing that the commission came to understand, that the degree of concentration of poverty is also a factor. There's a huge difference between a school that has, say, 50% free and reduced lunch versus 90%. You don't have the economic diversity in the school, and that's a huge factor. So in addition to the compensatory funding, schools will get extra money based on the degree of concentration of poverty. So that's a new idea that has come into our funding formula that has been based on very high quality research, that these extra funds are needed as the concentration of poverty rises.
There is one other thing that I'm concerned about. I am not knocking teachers, because I was always thought to feel that teachers were the ones in the right. But I think that there's a problem with quality of the people that you choose for teachers. And I know that there's going to be I don't know how you're going to be able to eliminate some of the teachers who've been in the profession for a while, but they're just not good teachers. That has to be done. And I don't know, I know this is a hard thing for me to say, but just because you're able to get the degree doesn't mean you'll be a good quality teacher. It's a person who is able to stimulate the child, to excite the child.
Well, and so part of that is we need to hold, and Dr. Kirwan was in higher ed for a long time, we need to hold higher ed accountable
Absolutely.
for having high-quality teacher education programs. When I got to the classroom, I had a master's degree in education and had no training at all in special ed, despite the fact that I had special ed students in every single one of my classes. No training in how to teach kids for whom English was not a first language. No training in actual the day-to-day functioning of a classroom and managing a classroom. So, you know, I think higher ed, the teacher prep programs have started to understand that they need to do a better job, and a lot of the programs are starting to improve, but we need to hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, there's a number of things that are going to happen. We're going to upgrade the quality of the teacher preparation program. We're changing we're ensuring that teachers are taught with the strategies and techniques that are necessary in the classrooms where they will be, not where they necessarily, the classrooms they came from. There is all sorts of techniques being that need to be built into the curriculum called restorative practices, helping teachers understand how to manage better classroom conflict. And it's not just the new teacher preparation programs. The Commission has recommended that there needs to be training for existing teachers so they can increase their skills. We can't wait for a whole new generation of teachers to come into the, and of course, raising the compensation, requiring teachers to be so-called national board certified. It's going to attract many more high-ability, dedicated people to the profession. So I think you're exactly right. We've got to create an environment where more of our best and brightest want to go into teaching.
Now, everybody, Mr. Kirwan has got to leave. But I want to answer the last question
Sure.
very quick. What happens if we don't do this? What do you predict if Larry Hogan gets his way in all of this and we can't?
It will be a very, very sad thing for our state because there won't be another commission in the next 20 years. This is just too much to undertake. So we will just fall back into a pattern where, you know, we're very much in the middle of the pack in the country. We've seen declining NAEP scores, so we can hope maybe they won't decline quite as fast. But we are creating a situation where we will exacerbate the income disparities in our state. And this is going to create more and more social tension. And here's the thing that people of means don't recognize. They're paying a lot so our state can fund Medicaid. They're paying a lot because we have all these prisons with young people incarcerated that shouldn't be there. They should be given a good education. So we're just going to see those circumstances get worse and worse and worse. And I've got to believe we're better than that as a state.
In the driving rain, which it still looks like.
It's gorgeous out. No, my vegetable garden is very happy right now.
But thank you both for being here and for educating people. How did you guys think this went? Did you feel like you know a lot more about what has happened with the commission and what the fight is that we've got on our hands now? That's a yes. All right, and we have one last announcement. We have videoed this. We're gonna have the video up on our website, which is mdlegislative.com. And we're gonna be sharing it out with all the groups that are part of the Legislative Coalition. And we'll share it out with Strong Schools and anybody that wants it, just to push it out there and let people have another way to learn about this. So thank you all. Thanks to Eric, thank you so much. And thanks to Brit Kirwan.